Well, and so thank you for letting me present on the New York Bloomer Girls, a project that have gotten started on. I've been looking at Bloomer Girl teams this year, and this is an ongoing project, so it's sort of in the middle of where I hope this eventually goes. But they're an important team from 1910 to 19, well, some sources will tell you 1933, 35. And my initial thought was 35, but I've found articles of them still playing as late as 1940. So we have expanded a little bit the look at the Bloomer Girls. Um, so want to start with just a little bit of background and history to sort of put this in context to kind of understand who they are, what they are doing. And so team was started in 1910 with Dan Whalen as the first original start owner of the team. Dan P. Whalen was a entrepreneur, real estate owner, restaurant owner, went back into the restaurant business when he leaves owning the team. He seems to have owned in New York City, at least according to various newspaper articles and editorials, a very successful seafood restaurant as his specialty. And Margaret Nabel was the original manager, player, and then will go on to take over as owner of the team, manager of the team, player manager, all the way through into 1936. So she is the stability of that team. And I think sometimes that's obviously one of the things that's necessary for team success is some of that stability. And this is a time period when women's baseball and women's opportunities are not are somewhat limited. And so seeing the opportunities that she gave to people. In that first season, they played 82 games, and my goal is to find all 82 games. I can tell you I have not found them all yet. I have found uh, not quite 50% of them, but so I feel good about the opportunity. Approximately 3,500 miles is what the various newspapers. Once I have them all, we might be able to test that out and get my students to help me figure out the how to do that and, and put together the mileage. But and much of that was done with train travel and that particular point in time, though later they're going to shift entirely to, or almost entirely, to traveling by automobile. So Nabel also served as often one of the drivers for one of their automobiles as well when they traveled. Just to show you in 1927, so not quite 20 years later, they had jumped from 82 games to 102, with at that point their highest yearly attendance reported in the newspapers. One of the things I will tell you that's fascinating about the New York Bloomer Girls versus others I have looked at. I presented earlier this year on the Boston Bloomer Girls and thought that they had significant coverage. Um, it's dwarfed by the coverage that the New York Bloomer Girls got, and they almost always indicate attendance. And so their attendance, depending on where they were playing, varied anywhere from 200 or 300 at a game to 5,000 or 6,000, depending on where. So, and then in 27, as often teams did back then, they declared themselves the female champions of the East, based on a 3-game tournament that often happened. And it wasn't necessarily that their opponent had come through any kind of championship. So often the opponent for them was the Boston Bloomer Girls. And in fact, at one point, the newspapers and advertising for the New York Bloomer Girls claimed that they had never lost a game between 1910 and 1935 to another women's team. I can tell you that's not true because I have found already, I've only found one so far, but I have found losses. So that goes to show you got to check on what the newspapers are telling you. 3 years later, they had jumped from 102 games to 166, 133 of which were on the road. And the other 33 played in and around the New York City area. So a very active team as the decades pass. Often, though not all the time, you will read, and they identify very nicely lots of box scores for the Bloomer girls. And male battery, pitcher, catcher, no surprise to us. Occasionally, you'll see them also having pitcher, catcher, and shortstop as the male battery with the other 6 female players. And then other times it is a full 9 female team. So kind of varies depending on the year and sometimes depending on who they are playing. We do know black and white pictures, but through descriptions in the papers, that their uniforms pretty consistently from 10 through the 30s were maroon and white. And they were bloomers, so not the long skirts that they had previously been wearing. They played most of their games and asked for most to sign up as either a percentage that they would receive from the gate or a flat guarantee. And that seems to have been a pretty consistent ask from both Whalen and Nabel. And so sometimes that meant they literally didn't play a game if the guarantee had not been paid up front, because that's usually what she asked for. And so getting that guarantee, she much preferred that. Obviously, a good business sense to prefer a guarantee over a percentage of whatever you bring in. This was the other unique thing about the team during much of the time, but certainly during the teens and 20s, it tails off a little in the 30s. Nabel listed 40 women on the roster for the New York Bloomer girls, though only 15 actually were at any time traveling with the team. The others were there to continue to receive training in case somebody got hurt. It was almost like their own feeder system, which is pretty unique. And also talks about hiring on either retired or injured major league players who were not playing during the season to actually provide the training for the women, in order to make sure that they had all the necessary skills, just the basics, that they had those down pat, because that was the way Nabel approached the game. So that's a pretty unique feature of any of the Bloomer girl teams that I have discovered to this point. They traveled, as I mentioned, usually in once things really got going, in 2 private cars, so they took turns driving. They had a daily food allowance in addition to everything else, typically through up until it looks like it changes during the Great Depression, no surprise there, about $2 a day. They also were paid, depending on the year, either $5 a day or $35 a week, depending on the year. It changed a little bit over the course of Nabel's ownership. And this is what I was saying. Papers claim that they never lost a game to a female team. So far, I can say that that is not true. We'll and see where that record takes them. The vast majority of their games, they actually played against men's teams. They play far fewer games against women's teams over the course of their existence. And the news coverage, I have over 8,000 articles already on the bloomers. And so, and yes, some of them are those single line, but a lot of them have way more detail than you're typically going to find. This is an example of one from 1912, September. One of their star players from the very beginning, and I mentioned her yesterday to you in the trivia, is Stella Friss. And you can see her here in the picture. Girl wonder pitcher, seen here in a game. And so they're talking about the pretty New York twirler will be seen in baseball games for the first time this season against another team. This promises to be an extraordinary attraction for the fans. And they go on to talk about who's going to be there, what this will be like. And so this is a good example. So this is 1912 with a picture of, and it's not the first time or the last time that Stella Friss will be sort of the centerpiece of both positive coverage and then some, I would argue, some not so and somewhat funny coverage that gives a description. Here is 1913. It says Stella Friss, who twirled 5 innings for the Bloomer girls last Saturday, can pitch a curveball. Sure enough, she demonstrated the fact sorry, didn't mean to jump ahead. I hit the wrong, oh, come on. What did I just do? I don't know what I just did. Sorry. I hit something wrong. Sorry about that. Technical. Sure enough, she demonstrated the fact before the game she was has mastered a slow drop. Of course, the gal lacks speed in her pitching from the male player's standpoint, but she is a crackerjack just the same. The manner in which Stella can swing the bat would do credit to some male players. Stella received a big hand of applause when she belted the horsehide over the crowd in left field. It was a sure enough two-bagger. She drove another fly to left field in the seventh inning. So she was not only known for her pitching, but also for her hitting as well. And in fact, there were many times where she batted cleanup in the lineup if Helen Demarest was not playing. And so here's a 1916 article from a newspaper in New York. I did it again. And it says, the New York Bloomer Girls will be here this Saturday. The funny little fat girl is rumored to be still with the team. That's Stella Friss. You just saw her picture, but that's how they describe her. The funny little fat girl is rumored to still be with the team. Her coaching and witty sayings will keep the crowd in an uproar. The girls are all newly uniformed in maroon and white, according to manager D.P. Whalen. He talks about who's coming, and then he says, when he was interviewed, we always get a large assemblage of men to attend this annual game. What we want is for the wives and sweethearts to come too. They will be just as interested as the men. We have the finest aggregation of girl baseball players in the country, and this will be their last appearance. They are an excellent proof that women can do anything that a man can do in the line of athletics, and we expect a great number of the Ridgewood fairer sex to come out on Saturday afternoon. So he acknowledges that they're as good as anybody, but encouraging others to come out to see them play. We have a wonderful collection at the Baseball Hall of Fame from Florrie O Rourke, who played with the team. And this is from her scrapbook, talking about, and the unfortunate thing is you can see it tells you all the places they played, but nothing else. So we don't know when, we don't know scores. This was beforehand. She does the only other thing she indicates at 21 was which games were at night. She goes on in her own diary, which we also have for the same season, to talk about a little bit about some of the players she encountered, but she talks more about some of the places they went to and how this was all new to her. But it is a wonderful addition. And so this is partly what I was using for the 21 season to track down all of the games in these places, which is, as you can see from some of the places, a little difficult because these are not necessarily big towns with newspapers. And there again is Stella Friss in 1921, still with and still playing under the name Stella Friss, because she will change that when she decides that she could make more money or gain more sponsorships and things like that if she had her own team. And so she's going to change her name and create a team of her own called the Devil Dogs. And then go back to play with the New York Bloomer Girls. Just a few other kinds of coverage they get. So here's one, Boston Red Sox being advertised, and right underneath that is the advertisement for the Bloomer Girls coming to play in the same place. And so you'll see a number of these kinds of ads that you can find telling us a little bit about where they're playing or who else is being advertised with them. And so this is picture and you in 1921 as well. And you can see clearly what I was talking about the male and female battery that are, and so the two males that are in the picture. And so it says two young men play, one pitching, the other catching. And then it says, but in the next game, there's going to be an all-girl team. So providing some, so there's lots of pictures like this. And the nice thing is some of them, this one doesn't give you the names, but a lot of times they'll tell you exactly who's in the picture. So you get a lot more detail than you would normally get. And here is again, 1927, Feminine Rogers Hornsby. Maggie Riley, rated as the best girl baseball player, has swung into dynamic action this season. She's first base lady for the New York Bloomer Girls. She's handy with the bat as she is with the glove. This is Stella Friss. She changes her name, takes on the name Maggie Riley, and then creates her own team, the Devil Dogs, to play. And so she's jumping back and forth. She thought that she could parlay her play into making a great name for herself, one of the first big promoters of her own play. And she gets referred to as Roger Hornsby, Babe Ruth, etc. across, as do a couple of the other players. Another example, so here is the New York Bloomer Girls in 1928, and you can see what I was talking about. There's been a postcard that was also made of this one. Margaret Nabel is there on the far side, but each of the girls is identified. And a couple of the names there, Ethel Condon, Toots Andrews, and Helen Demarest, and Babe McCutton, and Elsie Runke all played for the team for over 15 years. And so there's again that stability that you can trace and follow for all of them playing. The others kind of come and go. 1928, this is an interesting one. Says a little mix-up occurred in the eighth inning when Ruth Doyle, center fielder, became a little incensed at the hootings and Peerings flung at her. Ruth forgot the game was in progress and gave chase and didn't come back to the outfield until the pesky boys were subdued. So she chased him. It goes on to talk about her chasing him into the stands to get them to stop booing and things like that, or rather unusual. And then it talks about the lively youngster Ethel Condon providing a number of sensational plays. She brought the house down by successfully gaining third when she was nearly run down between second and third, but finally foxed the two basemen and she's landed safely on the bag. So I love the language of the news reporting of the day, but you can see what I'm talking about much longer articles that give us some great detail, but also give us a feel for the reporting and how these women were received at the time. So good example of that female championship. So this is 28. They played against the Philadelphia Bobbies. So I put this in here for you, Kat. And they beat them 40-5, like a football score. They then played the Fleischman Yarn girls and they beat them 27-9. And then they beat the Baltimore Black Sox girls, the African American team, 51-2. Helen Demarest was the pitcher of record for most of those games. So she had 17 strikeouts over 2 games, only gave up 2 hits and 2 walks. Toots Andrus was the other star of the games, had 4 extra base hits over the course of, and lots of errors, as you can imagine, with scores like that. But this is an example of them being able to declare themselves female champions of and they always declared themselves not female champions of the world, but female champions of the East. Some of our other teams tended to broaden that out and say they were the champions of the world. That's not typically what you get here. Here are another picture. So the third baseman, Babe McCutton, with the team for over 15 years, often referred to as the Babe Ruth of the team. Home run hitter, first baseman, and third baseman for the team. And then Toots Andrus, first base pitcher and outfielder. Because they only carried typically 15 players, all of them, for the most part, with very few exceptions, could play multiple positions and did play multiple positions. And sometimes that's what caused the errors because they weren't necessarily as practiced in one position over another. But almost every single one of them could pitch, and we see that pretty regularly that they're doing. This is another example as we go through so this is from 1933. The Battle of the Sexes became a reality last night when the Roslyn Heights Fire Department team repelled the invading New York Bloomer girls with a score of 6-3. So they turn it into this fight, talk about the Battle of the Sexes kind of idea, but I love that. Repelled the invading New York Bloomer girls. So again, you get a feel for some of the coverage of this kind of thing. Again, this is 1934, so fans will see a really interesting, fast, closely contested game as a first-class attraction is guaranteed. There are more than 40 on the roster, assuring a good active team. Fans will marvel at the work of this club. The girls can field and throw, bat and run bases, and know what to do with the ball when they get it. So we're giving them all this credit and then say, oh yeah, by the way, they're coached and they know the game from every angle. The girls always draw record turnouts and are proud of this fact, but the thing which pleases manager Margaret Nabel most is the fine reputations our girls enjoy from Nova Scotia to Texas and all the states in between. She has had the girls at all sections and is proud of the splendid reputation, her attraction enjoys. So it's interesting how they refer to them as an attraction and not a baseball team, right? And it's all about, there are lots of articles all about their reputation and their behavior. No surprise to any of us. And so, as I said, the teams continue on into 35 is their last full season. And then there are articles of them. They continue for probably about 15 or 20 games in 36, a little bit less than that in 37. And then only a couple of times as most of the players start to move to other teams and the Bloomer girls are starting to disappear as we get into the latter part of the 30s. That's really the beginning of the end of the Bloomer girl teams, a lot of them suffering because of the Great Depression and just not having the opportunities to travel and the resources to do that. And so that's kind of where they're at. And as I said, this is an ongoing project. My goal, ideally, is to, as I said, find as many of the games that they played every year as I can possibly find. I've got an Excel sheet with all of the games in it, and all of the places, and so eventually I'll be able to share that with everybody and show you where they went, who they played, all of those kinds of good things.
Leslie, do you
It's
mean just the New York Bloomer Girls, or are you going to be tracking all of the Bloomer
For
Girls teams?
now, I'm just tracking. Well, I was gonna, but then when I realized how big this one is, I'm starting here. And it will allow me to track some of the other teams they played. I kind of started on the Boston Bloomer Girls as well, and then I got distracted by this one. And so I've kind of got those two going side by the rabbit hole I went down with the New
Yeah.
York Bloomer Girls was a little unexpected. But eventually, I mean, that would be, I hope to do both of those at least, and that would give us a lot about the other women's teams as well. But I'm going to focus to begin with on New York and see what, simply because of the amount of coverage that is out there. And
And
it
is that
and
because it's
so
New
much,
York?
I'm sorry.
Is that because it's New York?
Well, partly, but I also think it's Margaret Nabel and her it's very clear that she understands business and she understands
Mm,
how to promote the team. And then she's got Stella Friss and she's got Florrie O Rourke, and two other players who are also very, very, very good at promoting themselves
mm.
as part of the Bloomer Girls. And so there's a real sense that they understood that. So New York certainly helps. But so many of their games are played outside of New York as well, that it's reliant on small town newspapers and things. So I think it's a combination of both of those and their success. They, yes, they lose a lot to the men's teams, but there are a lot of games where they're losing in the 10th and 11th and 12th innings, things like that. So now that's not to say there aren't also scores where they were at the receiving end of a 45-3 score like they did to the women's teams. But for the most part, they often put up good competition. So
Lots of questions and comments. What other cities had Bloomer Girls teams?
oh wow. Lots and lots and lots. Um, it's more than you would think because it's everything from Baltimore, Philadelphia, St. Louis, lots of cities, smaller cities. And then city like the Hollywood All-Stars are not really claimed by any particular necessarily city, but there are the Las Vegas Bloomer Girls. I got the Denver Bloomer Girls, the Fort Worth Bloomer Girls. The list just is, yeah, way bigger than we tend to think.
Great. Ryan comments, fascinating how successful these teams were at a time when women weren't typically paid to be athletes or entertainers. Uh,
Correct. Yeah.
let's see, is the diary that you mentioned online?
Yes, it is. At least the main pages of it as part of the Hall of Fame's collection. If you just look up their Bloomer Girl collection, you'll find that chart that I showed you of the 1921 season, and then the first couple pages of her work is there so that people can see it.
Could you talk a little bit about what else is in the Hall of Fame collection?
So as far as Bloomer Girl materials, they have a fair number of photographs is probably the biggest part of their collection. A few 3D pieces, certainly. I think Florrie O Rourke's collection is one of their more extensive, but they also have the research records of Barbara Grigorich and some of Deb Shattuck's as well, and that kind of thing. So they have, it's an increasing collection, particularly of newspaper articles, things like that.
Great, thank you. Maureen is wondering, did the male battery mates, were the male battery mates local, or did they travel with the team?
So it varied across the years. In the early years, it appears just by the names that they definitely traveled with the team, but it also is apparent that sometimes they were picking up somebody locally, simply out of probably necessity. And so you get a bit of both. But I would say more commonly it appears at this stage that they were traveling with the team.
And Elizabeth is curious if the battery hit, or did they only pitch and catch?
Nope, they played the full game. That's a great question, but they are listed. Um, and it's interesting the many of the box scores that I've seen so far, they rarely seem to contribute anything in the hitting side.
Interesting.
It's the big hitters always seem to be Andrus, McAdam, Demarest, and Friss for the most part.
Did the New York Bloomberg Girls play many games in Canada? If so, which decades? Gary's question.
Yeah, so great question. That one, there's lots of claims in the newspapers that they did. I have not found as many of those scores yet, but I have some from 27, 28, 29, and expect that I will find more.
Wow. Follow up, Gloria, were any of these teams in Texas? You mentioned Fort Worth, did I hear?
Yeah, so there were Bloomer Girls, a number of Bloomer Girls teams in Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, um, San Antonio. Trying to think what else. Those are the ones that pop into my head right off the bat. Um, Waco. It's all I can remember right off the top of my head.
Any
But
West
yeah,
Coast?
yeah. Um, not as much playing against some of these teams. They tended to stay, and probably the Hollywood All Stars are
Oh,
probably one of the more famous of the West Coast teams. Um, it seems like, to a certain degree, at least in newspaper coverage anyway, so far, the West Coast baseball scene is a little bit like Major League's baseball scene prior to the
mm,
1940s as it moves westward. And of course, by then, most of the Bloomer Girl teams are going to be gone. Now,
right.
that being said, there is a very famous African American women's team um, playing in a small league in Los Angeles area, East Coast Bayside Girls. And I'm going to talk about them in my upcoming book, but they're one of the more famous teams that is playing out there, playing much more locally, but pretty good coverage. And they had a female reporter that seemed to be their primary, which is also kind of unusual.
Wow, what a lot to learn. You don't know what you don't know, right? This is
It's what
great.
makes these it's what makes these things so much fun. You start down and suddenly, oh, so Kat, the other piece I was going to tell you, everybody talks about Edith Houghton playing for the New York Bloomer Girls.
Mm-hmm.
I have found two box scores because she didn't play long, but I
Right.
will send them to you because
Okay,
I
good.
have two
Yep.
that do show her in, not just on the list, but actually in the lineup.
Cool. This is interesting. Did any of the very young Bloomer girls make it into the All-American Girls?
Ah, great question. Um, I I haven't really looked at that. That's probably
Mhm.
something that I need to sit down with Ryan and sort of maybe throw
was
some
gonna
names
say,
at him
ask
and see what you
Brian.
think,
Yeah.
because I'm not as familiar with will admit every single roster, and I know Ryan could probably help me with that and probably something. Um, Ryan, the only name that immediately jumps into my head, and I could be wrong, but isn't there a run key that plays in the All-American League?
There is, and she was in the early years, so that's possible.
Do
We
you
had
know what her first name was by any chance?
that was Irene.
Okay, because the one that played for the New York Bloomer Girls, her name was Elsie. So, but I saw the last name and that was the one that leaped out at me as a possibility, but I couldn't remember the other. But I bet there, it's certainly possible that there might be, but the fact that they stopped, well, maybe it's possible, but I haven't, that's an interesting question that will have to be pursued. Another one of those research rabbit holes. So Ryan, I may be enlisting you to take a look at some of that to see as we come up with some names.
Two last questions from the chat. When will the book be out, and is it possible to watch your presentation on the Boston Bloomer Girls?
Yeah, the that one I have to find the link, but yes, is the answer. I know it's out there. And then as far as the book, my hope, if it doesn't get derailed again, is either late 2026 or early 2027. It's a little behind, but we're getting there. So probably late 20. And my guess is if I don't get it in time to come out like it right at around World Series season, they'll probably wait to have it come out in the spring as a baseball because that's a better time as far as publishers. So my guess is probably more likely spring of 2027.
Well, thank you. We'll look forward to that and hearing more about it. And again, can't thank you enough for all you do.
Thanks everybody, and I
You're
loved all the
amazing.
questions. You gave me some new thing, which is always the best part, new things to think about and pursue. I appreciate it.